The world 10 million years ago wasn't anything like the pictures in our school books. Forget about those fuzzy little apes scrambling around. The real world was an ocean of green and brown, so big you could get lost forever just trying to see, from one side to the other. Imagine a place where the air itself was a thick, warm blanket, smelling of damp earth and rotting leaves and a million different blossoms all at once. That's what I see in my head when I think about it. Not from a book, but like I'm standing right there, watching. It's not a movie in my mind, more like a memory I've never had. It's the story of Ouranopithecus. He wasn't called that, of course. Nobody was around to give him a name like that. In my head, I call him Kale. He was one of them. A big guy, not like a monkey at all. Think more like a hulking, powerful ape, but with a face that was a little different. A bit flatter, maybe, with a strong, solid jaw and a serious look in his deep-set eyes. He was part of a group, a family, and they lived in a place that must have been the best place on earth for them. It was a massive, sprawling woodland in a land we now call Greece. Not the rocky, sun-baked place it is today, but a paradise of trees and water. The story starts on a morning just like any other. The sun was still a hint of gold behind the jagged mountains, and the world was just beginning to wake up. Mist clung to the ground like a lazy ghost, and the leaves of the great trees dripped with dew. Kyle woke up high in the branches of an immense chestnut tree, the bark rough and comforting under his thick hands. His mother, an old, wise female named Laia, was already awake, her dark eyes scanning the canopy with an alertness that never seemed to fade. Beside him, his younger sister Zora was still curled up, a small, dark ball of fur. Their world was a vertical one. They didn't really belong on the ground, not for long anyway. The trees were their highways, their homes, and their fortresses. Kyle moved with a kind of slow, deliberate power. He wasn't fast like a monkey, swinging and leaping with frantic energy. He was heavy, his shoulders broad and powerful, built for climbing and for tearing open the tough, fibrous fruits that made up their diet. He shifted his weight, and the branch groaned softly in protest. The sound was swallowed by the immense quiet of the early morning forest. It wasn't silent, of course. There were 100 different noises, all weaving into a single seamless song. The high-pitched trill of an insect, the soft cooing of a bird far away, the gentle rustle of leaves as a small rodent scurried below. Breakfast was the first order of business. Laia had already spotted a cluster of figs, swollen and purple, on a nearby branch. She gestured with a quick, efficient hand motion, and Kyle followed her. The troop was waking up all around them, a dozen or so dark shapes moving through the treetops. There was the grizzled old male, Borak, who was the leader, and a few younger ones and some mothers with their tiny infants clinging to their backs. Kale wasn't a baby anymore, but he still followed Laia. He knew she was the smartest of them all, the one who remembered where the best fruit was, where the safest branches were. He reached for a fig, the skin yielding easily under his fingers. It was sweet and full of seeds, and he ate it with a contented rumble deep in his chest. His hands were incredible tools. They weren't like ours, with a thumb that could touch every fingertip. Their thumbs were a little different, maybe not quite as precise, but they were strong enough to tear apart a tough husk or to grasp a branch with an iron grip. This was a world where strength was everything. The food they ate was hard and fibrous, and the trees they lived in were ancient and unyielding. You had to be built for it. The sun finally broke over the horizon, sending shafts of light slicing through the canopy. The forest floor came alive with a new kind of energy. Below them, Kale could see the long, graceful neck of a Civatherium, an ancient giraffe relative, as it moved slowly through the undergrowth, its head an impossible distance from the ground. They weren't a threat, just another part of the tapestry, of life. But there were other things that made Kale's fur stand on end. He caught a glimpse of a shadow, low to the ground, moving with a silent, predatory grace. A Machairodus, a type of saber-toothed cat. It was a beautiful and terrifying thing, and Kale felt a shiver run through him. Laia saw it too. She gave a low, rumbling grunt, a warning to the rest of the troop. They all went still, their eyes fixed on the forest floor below. The cat moved on, unaware of the silent, watchful eyes above it. This was their life. A quiet dance between eating and sleeping and watching for danger. It seems simple, maybe even a little boring to us now, but it was everything. It was the rhythm of their existence. It was about being in a place that fit them, a place where they were perfectly designed to survive. Later that afternoon, Kyle decided to explore. Borak, the leader, was content to stay in the same grove, but Kyle was young and restless. He moved away from the troop, careful to stay within sight of Laia's watchful eyes. He climbed higher, to a branch so thin it swayed and groaned under his weight. From there, he could see for miles. It was like looking out over a giant green ocean, rolling and unbroken. He could see a glint of water in the distance, a small river snaking its way through the valley. He was curious. He wanted to know what was beyond the next ridge, what kind of fruits grew in the next valley. It was a kind of thinking that was new, a spark of something more than just survival. It wasn't a plan, not really, just a pull. A feeling that there was more to this world than the trees they lived in. He saw a flash of brilliant blue and green, a flock of strange exotic birds with long tails and hooked beaks. They were eating from a tree he didn't recognize. The fruit was a bright, almost luminous yellow. Kyle watched them for a long time. The birds were frantic, fighting over the ripest ones. He wanted to try one, but the branch was too thin, and the birds were too noisy. He knew better than to make a scene. He decided to come back later, maybe when the birds were gone. As the day wore on, the sun climbed high and hot in the sky. The forest was thick with the hum of insects and the calls of 100 different animals. Kale and his family spent the afternoon lounging in the shade, napping and grooming one another. Grooming was important. It wasn't just about keeping clean. It was about social bonds, about showing that you cared for each other. He groomed Zora's fur, picking out little bits of leaf and twig. She chattered softly, a contented sound. He was a big male, but he wasn't yet in charge. Borak was the leader, and Borak was a formidable ape. He had scars on his face and shoulders, and his teeth were stained and worn down from a lifetime of chewing tough roots and branches. Kale watched him, trying to learn what it meant to be a leader. Borak was always on the move, always scanning, always alert. He was the first to wake and the last to sleep. He was the one who made the decisions, who decided where they would go and when they would rest. It was a heavy burden, Kale thought. As the sun began to sink, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, the troop began to prepare for the night. They found a cluster of big, sturdy trees, and each one of them began to build a nest. It wasn't a fancy nest, just a simple platform of branches and leaves, woven together to make a safe and comfortable place to sleep. Kyle helped Laia with her nest, and then he started on his own. He was good at it, his hands weaving the branches together with a practiced ease. As the last light faded from the sky, the forest filled with a new chorus of sounds. The chirping of crickets, the hooting of an owl, the distant cry of a cat on the prowl. Kale settled into his nest, the branches cradling him like a soft hammock. He could hear the gentle breathing of his family nearby. He was safe. He was home. This was their world. A world of peace and quiet rhythm. It was a world that had been the same for thousands of years, maybe even millions. The trees were old friends, and the river was a constant companion. They had everything they needed. They were the masters of this little corner of the world. They didn't know it, but everything was about to change. The rhythm was about to be broken. A new story was about to begin, and it wasn't going to be about a beautiful forest and a peaceful life. It was going to be about survival, about change, and about the long, slow, dangerous journey that would lead them to a new, unrecognizable future. But for now, under the vast, star-strewn sky, Kale was just an ape, sleeping in a tree, dreaming of nothing at all. He didn't know he was a ghost, a forgotten ancestor, a piece of a puzzle that wouldn't be put together for 10 million years. He was just Kale, and this was his world. The quiet rhythm of life for Kale and his family wasn't something they thought about. It was just the way things were. They knew the patterns of the sun, the cycles of the moon, and the places where the best food grew. They had a feeling for the forest, a deep, ancient sense of its moods. But lately, something was off. The feeling was a little different, like a subtle change in the air, a shift in the scent of the wind. It wasn't a sudden, jarring event. It was slow, too slow for a single day to show it. It was the kind of thing you only notice when you look back. One morning, the river seemed a little lower than usual, the water not quite reaching the rocky bank they often used to drink from. The leaves of some of the younger trees had a dry, brittle feel to them, even after a night of mist. And the figs, the big, juicy ones that were their favorite, seemed smaller and tougher this season. The narrator's voice in my head, the boy telling the story, wondered about this. How do you explain a slow change to creatures who live entirely in the now? He imagined them feeling a kind of unease, a low thrum of worry in their ancient bones. It wasn't a roar or a fire, but a silent, creeping thing. The animals that lived on the forest floor, the ones Kyle and his family often saw, were behaving differently too. The herds of giant Cephalotherium were moving more quickly, their heads held high as if searching for something they couldn't find. The sleek, graceful Chalicotherium, a strange hoofed creature that looked a little like a horse and a little like a gorilla, were fewer and farther between. And the predators, the silent Machairodus, and the opportunistic Hyenodon seemed hungrier, their eyes sharper, their shadows longer. Kale's mother, Laia, felt it more than anyone. She was older, her memory a deep well of seasons and cycles. She remembered when the river had flooded, when the rains had been so long and so constant that the forest floor turned to a swamp. She remembered years of plenty, when every tree was heavy with fruit. This was different. This was a long, dry hunger that seemed to stretch on forever. Borak, the leader, was restless. He led them on longer treks each day, going farther from their usual territory. They had to leave the comfort of their familiar trees, the ones they knew every branch and hollow of. They moved into new groves, but the problem was the same. The land was changing. The dense, unbroken canopy of their home was starting to thin, out in places. Patches of open, sun-baked ground were appearing, places where the grass was yellow and crunchy underfoot, and the trees were scattered and small. This was the start of the big shift. The geological forces of the planet, the massive, slow movements of the land itself, were changing the climate. The narrator imagined it like a giant hand, slowly tilting the landscape. The ancient Tethys Sea was disappearing, the land was rising, and the once lush, tropical forests were beginning to dry out. It was a change on a scale that was impossible for Kale to comprehend, but he felt its effects every day in his belly and in the parched earth. One afternoon, as they were making a long journey in search of a new grove of trees, Kale saw something that made him stop. It was a massive, empty space. A huge meadow stretched out before them, its tall grasses swaying in the hot wind. There were a few lone trees scattered across it, like islands in a vast green sea. It was a frightening sight. The forest had always been their home. The open ground was a place of danger, a place where they were exposed and vulnerable. Borak stopped at the edge of the meadow. He sat on a low branch, his powerful brow furrowed in concentration. The troop waited behind him, a nervous energy running through them all. The young ones whimpered softly. This was a new kind of fear, a fear of the unknown, of a world that wasn't what it was supposed to be. They were creatures of the trees, and the trees were slowly disappearing. Laya grunted, a low, worried sound. She was looking back the way they had come, as if wishing they could turn around. But she knew there was nothing to go back to. The food was gone there, too. They had to move forward. The narrator imagined Borak feeling the weight of the moment, the burden of deciding to step into a new, dangerous world. He was the protector, the leader, and his instincts told him to stay in the trees. But his gut told him the trees were failing. Finally, with a sigh that was almost a growl, Borak made his decision. He dropped to the ground, his knuckles hitting the earth with a soft thud. He began to walk out into the open, a cautious, deliberate gait. Kyle watched him, his heart thumping. The rest of the troop followed, one by one, hesitantly. The feeling of the dry grass under their feet was strange and unsettling. It rustled with every step, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the open space. The sun beat down on them, unfiltered by the familiar canopy. Kyle squinted, the light hurting his eyes. He had to be extra vigilant now. He could feel a terrible sense of exposure. Any predator in the tall grass could see them, and they had no high branch to retreat to. He kept his head up, his eyes darting back and forth, searching for any sign of movement, any hint of a threat. He was a creature of a different world, and in this new one he felt out of place like a fish out of water. They walked for a long time, the journey feeling endless. They finally reached a small cluster of trees on the other side of the meadow. It was a temporary reprieve, a small oasis. The trees were thin and not as tall as the ones they were used to, but it was better than nothing. They scrambled up into the branches, sighing with relief. The sense of safety was immediate, a heavy weight lifting from their shoulders. But the relief was short-lived. The food in these trees was scarce, and it was clear they couldn't stay here for long. The narrator imagined this as a turning point, a pivotal moment in their history. They were no longer just living in their world, they were being forced to adapt to a new one. That night, as the moon rose over the vast, empty meadow, Kale couldn't sleep. He sat on a branch, watching the moon pass over the landscape. He saw the dark shapes of animals moving below, shadows that seemed to glide through the night. He heard the distant, mournful call of a hyena, a sound he had never heard so clearly before. In the forest, the trees had always muffled the sounds of the night, but here they seemed to carry for miles. He looked at his hands, his strong, broad hands that were so good at climbing and pulling fruit. He wondered if they were good for anything else. He looked at his feet with their long, grasping toes, perfect for gripping branches. What good were they on this flat, empty ground? The world was changing, and he felt a deep, unsettling feeling that they weren't designed for the world that was coming. The next day, they moved again. And the next. Their journey was a slow, deliberate trudge. They were always looking for the next grove of trees, the next source of food. They were no longer a settled family. They were nomads, forced to wander by the changing world around them. The narrator imagined the troop's social structure shifting, too. There was more tension now. The younger males were more prone to squabbles over the small bits of food they found. Borak had to be more forceful, his low grunts of warning more frequent. Kyle's sister, Zora, was thinner now. Her eyes seemed older. She was more cautious, clinging to her mother Laya's back for longer periods. The playful energy that had once animated her was gone, replaced by a constant state of low-level fear. Kale watched her, a fierce protective instinct rising in him. He wanted to find a place for them, a place where they could be safe again, a place like the one they had left behind, the one that was quickly becoming a memory. One afternoon, they came to a place where the trees were even more sparse. The ground was hard and rocky. There was no sign of the lush green undergrowth he was used to. In the distance, he could see a shimmering haze. It was a vast open plain, stretching as far as he could see. It was a landscape of a new world, a world where the trees were gone and the ground was king. Cale felt a shiver run through him. This was the future. This was what the world was becoming. They had to adapt, to become something new, or they wouldn't survive. The old ways of life were fading, and a new, more dangerous one was taking its place. But he didn't know what that new way of life would be. He just knew it would be hard, and that the great green ocean of their home was now just a memory, a story that was slowly being erased by the sun and the wind. The changing landscape wasn't just a challenge for Cale and his family, it was an open invitation to new and terrifying dangers. The narrator, the boy telling the story in my head, imagined these dangers with a kind of breathless awe. They weren't just bigger or stronger. They were creatures of the open ground, perfectly built for a world Cale was only just beginning to know. The peaceful life in the trees had insulated them from the real dangers of the Miocene world. But now, with the canopy thinning and the savannas spreading, that protection was gone. The first hint of a new danger came one morning as they were on the move. The sun was hot, beating down on the scattered trees they used for shelter. The ground was rocky and dry. Cale was walking with his sister, Zora, holding her hand in his. She was quiet, her small hand gripping his tightly. Borak was ahead of them, his powerful shoulders hunched, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Laya was close by, her face a mask of worry. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl rippled through the air. It wasn't the distant cry of a cat. It was close, too close. The sound seemed to come from the tall, yellow grass a little way off. The troop froze. Every instinct told them to climb, to get into a tree. But there wasn't a good one close enough. They were exposed, standing on the open ground. Out of the grass stepped a massive creature. It was a hyenodon, not like the hyenas we know today. This was a giant, bear-like beast with a huge head and a jaw that could crush bone. Its teeth were long and sharp, and its eyes held a cold, predatory intelligence. The narrator described it as a nightmare made real. This was a creature of the New World, a scavenger and a hunter built for the open plains, and it had a hunger that made no distinction between prey. The hyenodon stopped, its head lowered, its eyes fixed on Zora. She was small and vulnerable, an easy meal. A deep, shaking fear went through Cale. He pulled Zora behind him, his body instinctively moving to shield her. Borak let out a loud, terrifying roar. It was a sound of pure power and defiance, an ancient warning. The other males of the troop joined in, their roars and grunts echoing across the valley. They stood their ground, a tight circle of muscle and defiance, trying to look bigger, trying to sound more dangerous. The hyenodon seemed to hesitate. It was used to scattering herds of smaller animals, but these creatures were different. They were big. They were loud. And they stood together. For a moment, it was a standoff. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, another creature stepped out of the grass. This one was even more terrifying. It was a Machairodus, a large saber-toothed cat with enormous curved fangs that hung from its upper jaw. This was a true hunter, a killing machine. It moved with a silent, fluid grace, a perfect predator. The hyenodon backed off, not willing to compete with the cat. The saber-toothed cat, however, wasn't deterred by their roars. It was a solo hunter, and it was focused on a single target. It looked at Borak, then at Cale. It was weighing the risk and the reward. The narrator described this as the moment the game changed. In the trees, they had been safe. On the ground, they were prey. Borak gave a signal, a short, sharp grunt. It was a command to move, not to run, but to walk, slowly and deliberately, toward a large cluster of rocks 100 yards away. It was a risky move, but running would only trigger the predator's chase instinct. They began to move, their backs to the cat, their hearts pounding in their chests. Every step felt like a lifetime. Kyle kept Zora close, his hand never letting go of hers. He could feel her shaking. He was shaking too. The cat followed, its muscles rippling under its coat. It was patient. It was waiting for a mistake, a stumble. Kale imagined the cat's mind, its simple, deadly focus. It didn't think about yesterday or tomorrow. It only thought about the moment, about the hunt. And they were in its hunting grounds. Finally, they reached the rocks. They were huge, a natural fortress. Borak led them up a narrow crevice, scrambling up the rough surface with a speed Kale didn't know he had. The cat couldn't follow them up the sheer rock face. They were safe, for now. From their perch, they watched the Machiridus stalk the base of the rocks, its tail twitching in frustration. It let out a frustrated growl before finally turning and disappearing back into the tall grass. The narrator paused here in my head, thinking about the significance of this moment. They had survived, not by running or fighting, but by a combination of quick thinking and cooperation. They had used the environment, not just as a source of food, but as a source of protection. This was a new way of living, a new kind of intelligence. It wasn't about instinct anymore. It was about problem solving. It was about thinking. The rest of the day was filled with a nervous tension. They stayed high in the rocks, huddled together, unable to relax. The memory of the cat's cold eyes and the hyenodon's massive teeth was burned into their minds. They had to find a safer place. The open ground was no longer just an obstacle. It was a constant, life-threatening danger. As the sun began to set, Kyle noticed Borak watching a group of small, fast-moving animals in the distance. They looked a little like ancient gazelles, and they moved with incredible speed and agility. They lived entirely on the open plains, and they thrived there. They had to. The narrator imagined Borak studying their movements, their watchful eyes, their constant awareness of their surroundings. He was learning. He was watching creatures that had mastered the new world, trying to understand their secrets. The troop needed a new plan. They couldn't stay in the rocks forever. They were safe from predators, but there was no food and no water. They had to move. Borak led them out again as the sun was a thin sliver on the horizon. The low light and the long shadows offered a little more protection. They moved in a tighter group now, their bodies close together. They were a single, powerful unit, not a collection of individuals. The narrator described this as the moment. They became a different kind of family. The old social bonds of grooming and resting were still there, but a new one was forming. The bond of shared fear and shared survival. They were a team, a single organism with one goal: to stay alive. They walked through the night, a long, difficult trek. They had to cross several open areas, and each time, Kale felt the same fear. He kept his head up, his eyes and ears straining to catch any sound, any movement. His senses were sharper now, honed by the constant threat. He was a different ape than he had been just a few days before. He was no longer just a creature of the trees. He was a survivor of the plains. By morning, they had found a new place. It wasn't a forest. It was a sparse collection of low, gnarled trees and rocky outcrops. It wasn't home, not in the way their old world was. But it was a place with more protection than the open ground. And in this new, unforgiving landscape, a new kind of thinking would be born. It would be a kind of thinking that would, over millions of years, change everything. But Kale didn't know that. All he knew was that he was tired, He was hungry, and he was grateful to be alive. He sat in the shelter of a small rock and watched the sun rise over a world that was both new and terrifying. A world that demanded a new kind of strength. The dry, rocky ground offered little to a creature built for the trees. The troop was constantly hungry, their powerful jaws aching from trying to chew the tough, bitter roots and fibrous stems that were all they could find. The narrator imagined their desperation, the gnawing feeling in their bellies that was a constant companion now. They were a family of Ouranopithecus, but their world was no longer kind to them. One afternoon, Kale found himself separated from the rest of the troop. He was following a small, dry gully, hoping it might lead to a hidden source of water. He felt the sun on his back, a heavy, relentless weight. He was tired and his throat was raw. He came to a place where the ground was littered with small, hard stones. They were dark and round, and Kale didn't pay them much mind. He was looking for something edible. His eyes, however, caught a flash of color among the dull stones. It was a plant he had never seen before. It was a tough, low-lying bush with a cluster of bright red, almost jewel-like fruits. They were tiny, no bigger than the end of his thumb. They didn't smell like anything he knew, and his instincts told him to leave them alone. He knew that the brightest things in nature were often the most dangerous, but he was so hungry. He picked one up, turning it over in his hand. It was soft and a little sticky. A small, curious part of him, a part that was growing stronger every day, wondered what it would taste like. He hesitated for a long moment, his gaze shifting to the open, empty plain beyond. There was nothing else here. He made a decision that his ancestors might never have made. He put the small fruit in his mouth. It was a burst of flavor, sweet and tart at the same time. A delicious, sugary liquid filled his mouth. He ate another and another. They were a perfect, nourishing snack, full of energy he desperately needed. He let out a low, contented sound. He gathered as many as he could, his hands working quickly. When he returned to the troop, he showed the fruits to Laya. She sniffed them, her brow furrowed in suspicion. Borak, the leader, was more cautious. Still, he refused to try one at first, grunting his disapproval. But Kale ate a few more, showing them that they were safe. Finally, Laya, trusting her son, tried one. Her eyes widened, and a rumbling sound of pleasure came from her chest. Borak, seeing her reaction, finally relented. The discovery was a small one, a single new food source in a hostile world. But it was more than just a snack. The narrator saw this as a moment of profound change. Kale hadn't found the food by following an old trail or by using a learned behavior. He had used his curiosity and his own judgment. He had taken a risk. And in a world that was becoming more and more dangerous, that kind of thinking, that ability to problem solve, was the only thing that would save them. It was a flicker of something new, a new kind of intelligence, born out of hunger and the desperate need to survive.